Hello everyone, it is time for this week's live stream. I want to thank my sponsor, Rogers Reef Food, who provides the type of frozen food that your fish can gnaw on, chew on, rip apart, sort of like giving them, I always try to think of something new each week, like giving them beef jerky but not nearly as chewy. But at least it's not blown around in the tank and getting stuck in the rockwork and disappearing into the overflow. So that's pretty important. Coral Magazine is the publication I work on in all of my spare time. This magazine's been around for 20 years. It is supported by these subscribers. It's not being supported by advertisers. So please do subscribe. I want everyone that watches my channel and everyone in the world to subscribe to this magazine to enjoy it because it's the best magazine ever. I should add that I am the executive editor, so of course I might be slightly biased, but I'm even giving you a coupon code to save a couple of bucks. Please jump on it and get it today. I offer consultation services. If you need some help one-on-one, I do video chats. You show me your tank, you show me what's wrong. We talk face-to-face, and I do what I can to make your tank better. If you need that help, just let me know. You can email me at sales@milosreef.com. And if you have any questions about when or why or all that kind of stuff, email me and I'll be happy to answer your question. So here I am, and a bunch of you already here in the chat because I started 1 minute early. Instead of 2:08, I started at 2:07 Central Time. I do a weekly live stream. If you're new to this channel, subscribe. And I do a stream every single Saturday unless I'm out of town. And I talk about whatever's going on. This channel has something, what did I get? Over 750 videos are on this channel right now. YouTube recently congratulated me on like 18 years of being a YouTuber, but that's not really true. I did upload some videos 18 years ago because I was trying to figure out the software. But I would say over the last 10, 11, 12 years, I've really immersed myself in YouTube and provided a lot of content to help you with your reef tank. And today we've got a bunch of different topics to discuss. And so instead of just one topic, we're going to go through it. Just again, if you're new to this channel and don't know this stuff, I usually have a conversation for about 30 minutes or so, maybe 45. And then the last part of the video is question and answer from the audience. So I can answer whatever reef questions you may have and again, assist you, and it's free. So, I always encourage people to subscribe and to check out this channel and hopefully enjoy these streams as they're being presented to you. I wanted to kind of start off with what order do I want to go in, because I've got several things. All right, let's go with the first one on my list. How about that? So it was brought to my attention earlier this week by the secretary of DFW Mass. She said, "Hey, Mark, there's a thread about you on Reef to Reef, and the guy seems really upset, and you should probably take a look at this." And so I did. I went ahead to look at the thread, and basically he was concerned that I was holding back valuable information from newbies because I didn't think that they could handle it. And so really the question is, when are you no longer a newbie? When are you qualified to say, I know what I'm doing? And, what's your quantification? If you've kept the same aquarium for 5 years, does that make you an expert? Or does that make you an expert in that exact aquarium because you've been living it for 5 years? The animals that are inside, the specific corals you purchased that have done well, and the fish that you purchased, out of all the species available, you know those species quite well, and you really know that particular fish really well because it is used to you and has worked with you over all this time. But for example, let's just pick a fish. Let's say it was let's say your tank was a 75-gallon aquarium and you have a flame angel in there. Could you say that you're an expert on flame angels and can give the best advice for taking care of one? Or could you share that you've had a really good experience with your flame angel and here are the things you've done? Because there's actually a lot of information about flame angels that most people aren't privy to or don't care to even look up. And I mean, like I mentioned Coral Magazine earlier, when I was reading the article about identifying flame angels, I learned things that I never knew. I've been in the hobby since 1997. And during that time, flame angel, beautiful, I want it, done. But I learned in that story that based on the amount of black bars on the body could dictate male versus female. In this one story, I think it was Scott Michael that wrote it, he talked about how the different markings around the face of the flame angel are like fingerprints, and fish will recognize that exact one from other flame angels and be able to tell that's Bob, that's Steve, that's Mary, you know. They literally know if they can get along with them or if they have to fight them. I was like, are you kidding me? I had no idea. To me, they kind of all look the same. I know that sounds so fish racist, but it's true. Okay, so when you've had some experience, let's say you've only been doing this for a year. How much did you learn during that first year? How many mistakes did you make during that first year? How many times did you have to do an emergency rescue to fix the situation? Or did you go all in and you started with one tank and then you started with another one and then you upgraded to another one, and in the first year you've had 5 or 6 tanks, and so you feel like you have all this experience in setting up tanks? I'm not trying to be derogatory. I'm asking questions, and feel free to comment back. Because in the end, what we're talking about is how much can a person that's new in a hobby take into their brain and be able to ascertain the good information from the bad information, and not only be successful, but be able to assist others. So back to this topic about, why would I hold back information, or why would I tell a person that's new, you should not do this specific thing? There are reasons why I would do that. And it's never out of being mean or elitist. It comes down to, is it even the right time for you to be discussing this? Is it even the right time for you to be considering it? Let's take a specific thing. For example, if you were newer in the hobby and you had a problem with nitrates, my answer is going to be big water changes. I know others might say, oh, you should use vodka dosing. That'll solve it. Well, first of all, we don't know what their nitrate level is when you give that advice out. So let's rewind even further. The person that's online in a group on Facebook, for example, or on Reef to Reef or some other forum you're on, would say, my nitrates are sky high. How do I bring them down? My first question to their question is, how high is sky high? And if they say it's 20, I'm like, you're not sky high, first of all. And number 2, you don't have to worry about it. Now, if they were 80 or 100 or 200 or 300, I mean, occasionally you hear these random crazy high numbers. Yes, that would be sky high. And yes, that number needs to come down because it's just too high. And in that case, what is the best solution? Again, no matter how much experience you have in the hobby, the water change is the best approach to bring them down rapidly. And it's just water change after water change after water change. And you're doing big 50% water changes. And every time you do that, you cut the nitrate in half. Now, could the person buy a bottle of Nopox or use vodka dosing or use ethanol or something else? Yes. Would I recommend it to someone new? Absolutely not. And the reason being is that they are so new, they don't have enough experience under their belt to be able to recognize what's going wrong with their tank until it's too late. And now they've cooked their tank, they've destroyed everything, everything's died. And they end up saying, you know what, this hobby's too hard, and they quit, and they tell 10 other friends saltwater is too hard. And we lose another hobbyist, and we lose potential other hobbyists that always thought it would be really cool to do, but then somebody says to them, oh, it's way too expensive and it's way too hard, forget it, stick to freshwater. And so they don't do it, and they miss out on an amazing opportunity to have something beautiful in their tank. Now let's talk about me back in 1997 when I set up my first aquarium at that age. In other words, when I was a kid, 10, 11, 12 years old or so, somewhere in that range, I did have my own little 20-gallon long aquarium. I was going with my dad to the fish store, and I remember standing in the aisle, and it was all soaking wet on the ground. And I said to him, how many fish can I put in a 20-gallon long? And then this guy came back, well, you're allowed 1 inch of fish per gallon. And he said, so basically you could have, I don't know, I think he said you could have these 3 fish. I'm like, no, that's not going to work for me. I don't like that at all. And then I said, how many invertebrates can I put in there? And he said, there's no limit. And I was like, done. And so I came home with a 20-gallon aquarium, 20-gallon long, which is, probably 10 inches wide and 10 inches tall and probably 20 inches long. And that thing there, maybe it was a little bit bigger, but whatever. It was a longer tank rather than a tall tank because I like the length for more territory on the bottom for the things to scurry about. And I filled it up with hermit crabs, and I had a mated pair of coral banded shrimp. I had an arrow crab in there. I had snails in there. I mean, I just had all kinds of critters, and they were crawling all over each other and cleaning each other and keeping the tank clean. It was fantastic, and I loved it. But why did I even want this thing? Why was I in a fish store? Because my parents, my dad specifically, had his own aquarium that was a hex tank, and he also had some kind of a bigger tank in his bedroom, which might have been a 75 now I'm thinking about it. I've always thought it was a 55, but maybe it was a 75. And inside that, he had a couple of predators. He had a lionfish and a pantherfish and probably a butterfly or something else in there for color. And I remembered that I would have to hold the net in the tank to keep the lionfish away from my dad's hand while he's cleaning the algae off the glass. And he would say, your job is to keep that thing away from me. And of course, every once in a while, it got past me because I was a kid and I got distracted or I got bored or I'm tired of waiting, and my dad would yell at me and I'm like, oh, and I'd have to get the net and get the lionfish back over to my side of the tank, while he was working on the other side. So my experience as a little kid helping my dad with his aquariums, plus my brief time of having a small invertebrate-only aquarium, that's what I brought with me to 1997 when I got divorced. I walked out of the courthouse and went straight to a fish store and bought myself my first aquarium. And what I bought was a 29-gallon aquarium, because I knew it, an undergravel filter, some crushed coral. I know your eyes are rolling back in your head if you've been in the hobby a while. A light, a glass top, some kind of a nitrification starter kit to start a cycle in the tank, an air pump for the undergravel filter, and that was it. There was no other filtration. And then later on, I got a piece of rock, and then I got a couple more pieces of rock, and I was shocked at how expensive rock was. And then once the cycle was done, I put in a clownfish, or two, and maybe a blue damsel. I probably cycled with a blue damsel now I think about it. And I was growing all kinds of hair algae and dealing with all the problems of trying to keep the tank clean and not knowing what I was doing because I did not remember what my dad did. I didn't ask him. I was just doing my own thing in my own house, like so many people do. And, going to the fish store and saying, how do I get rid of this? And he kept selling me different bottles of Kent products saying this will get rid of it, and none of it helped. Okay, so for basically 5 years, from 97 to 2002, I was on my own with a little bit of advice from the fish store. And I was an absolute newbie. I did not know nearly enough to do anything more than have a few fish in an aquarium with some rock and, unfortunately, an algae plague that wouldn't go away. Now, I was using Facebook didn't exist. I was using news groups. There used to be a system back in the day before the internet where we used a system of collating and dispersing email in a collective group where you would write an email and you'd send it to the group and everyone in the group could read your post. And then people would reply and you'd get an email notification saying, check the group, or you just went to the group and you look through whatever posts existed in there. This was before there was forums. This is how we communicated. And I lived in there and I tried to learn stuff from other people. And as I gained knowledge, I would share with others the things I'd learned or the things that worked for me or the things I avoided because it was just not a good idea. And then finally in 2002, I went to my very first MACNA. I was on Reef Central briefly, just getting to know what a forum was because I was kind of glued to the what did I call it? The news group. And after MACNA, after going to a 3-day conference and attending 15 speaker presentations, I finally felt like I had the answers because 15 different experts taught us a specific topic. There's 15 topics, and all of them were something that I gained knowledge from, and they were the experts. They were the authors of the books. They were the people that wrote the articles, and here they were, and I could meet with them, have a drink with them in the evening, hang out, and just absorb knowledge. And I remember, for the subsequent weeks after attending that conference and listening to all those talks, I was able to be on Reef Central. And when people say, how do I get rid of cyanobacteria? And my answers always started with, I just learned at MACNA that blah, 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 blah. And I would teach that person what I learned about how to solve this problem. Or a person talked about a fish disease problem. I was like, I learned about a quarantine tank. And I remember, the speaker said that quarantining was actually very inexpensive and quite easy to do, and you shouldn't fear it. And I remember at the end when he was done, he says, any questions? And my hand shot up instantly. And I was just like, well, what about this? And what about the cycle? And what about the bacteria? And finally he says, you know what? Come talk to me when we leave the room because we only have 15 minutes. But I seized that knowledge and I really absorbed it. Now, when people these days are trying to learn, typically they're learning by hanging out in Facebook news groups, or Facebook groups. News groups, and they would just see posts and like, for example, somebody says, I got this, but I'm not even sure what it is. I've already forgot. I came home with it to my aquarium now. And people are like, oh, that is a cucumber. That is a cucumber. That is a cucumber. That is a cucumber. And then all the rest of the posts are like, that will kill your tank. That will kill your tank. Don't let it get in a power head. That will nuke your tank. Your tank will die. It's going to kill everything in your tank. And so then they hear that, they stick it in their brain, and then when anyone else mentions a cucumber, they say, oh, it's going to kill your tank. Which is not really fair. First of all, cucumbers are not grenades. If you want a grenade, a sea apple, that's a grenade. And even that one, there are people that have kept them successfully without destroying their tanks. So, but let me not digress at this point. My point is, the knowledge that you're gaining hanging out in a Facebook group, even if you live in it day after day after day, and you're just reading and learning and interacting with others and trying to absorb knowledge, it's not the best way to learn, and it's definitely not the best way to find the source later. As soon as you let go of that thread and it disappears from your screen, if you try to go find it again, it may not pop up again. It's, stuff on social media is literally meant to be here today and gone tomorrow, and the new thing replaces it, and it's not a repository of knowledge. That's why books exist, and magazines like Coral Magazine continue to build you a library of knowledge that you can turn to whenever a question comes up. And, right behind me here, I've got 20 years of Coral magazines, which 20 times 6, that's 120 volumes of information. Did I do that math right? I hate when I make mistakes. But I have all these magazines filled with articles written by experts that I can flip to. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, I brought Ben Johnson on this channel. And I said, let's talk about mantis shrimp. I've never talked about it before. And he keeps one. And I thought he's going to be the guy that's going to have all this great knowledge for us. And but then, of course, I thought, well, I should probably do some homework. And I found a Coral Magazine issue. And it had a lot of facts. And I learned a bunch. I took notes. I grabbed some photographs from the magazine to share during the interview or the conversation with Ben. And in the end, I kind of I ended up being the person with more knowledge in the conversation because I did all this research, where Ben was sharing with me his experience with mantis, whether it was his own or for clients, because he also maintains aquariums for other people. And I inadvertently made him look kind of bad because I was coming with all these hard facts where he was like, oh, okay. And and that wasn't my intent. I was trying to fill in voids in the conversation because I knew he'd come at me with all these facts, So anyway, the point is, if you're wanting to really know something, you have to do a lot of homework on it. And then when you've got the homework under your belt, then you have to learn to apply the knowledge you've gotten. And that's how you gain, good and bad experience. But when are you no longer a newbie? Was that the most long-winded way to handle this? I don't know, but I feel like it's a definite important discussion because that person felt firmly that I was saying people should not be allowed to do these things until they've proven themselves somehow. I've never said that. I've only warned people that are new, this isn't a good choice for you because you're still learning the ropes. You're still trying to figure out the mundane things. And I feel like if you're going to get into something like Reef Moonshiners, which I have never used and never done, I've never bought it either. Okay, it's never happened. If you were to go that route, I would say that is a better choice for someone with experience in the hobby who's been doing this a long time that wants to take their hobby to the next level. That is completely different from saying, here's a really cool technique that everyone can try. Because a brand new person in the hobby probably, I'm not going to say absolutely because I hate absolutes, probably will be discouraged by the high price of everything. And adding to the high price of everything an entire group of bottles of moonshiners, these trace element bottles, and probably adding dosing pumps to dose all those elements, further complicates the aquarium for someone that is new. And that's why it's not a good option for them. I feel like they should be focused on the basics: testing your water weekly, doing those water changes monthly, cleaning the glass daily, feeding the tank once, twice a day, buying a new coral, getting a new fish, quarantining, just the basic things that make the tank run. And I'm not even recommending newbies get a bunch of different equipment either. I feel like a tank is best with a sump. I feel like they should have a protein skimmer. And of course, they should have 2 return pumps, one in the sump and one on the shelf for if the one in the sump breaks down or needs to be cleaned, and they can just swap them out and keep the tank running, okay? And then, of course, the other little things like heaters, a thermometer, the basics. And actually, whenever something really goes wrong with a tank, one of the first things I recommend to someone is start getting rid of all the accessories and bring it down to the core of what the tank needs to live, and then gradually start adding things back in if there's a need. Do you need to add ozone? Do you need to add UV? Do you need to have a fleece roller? Do you need to run filter socks? Do you need, there's so many extra, an auto feeder. Do you need an auto feeder? Well, you do when you're out of town and no one's there to feed your tank, but the rest of the time, no. You should be feeding the tank yourself. You absolutely should have an automatic top-off system. Brand new in the hobby, yes, it will make your life so much better. And it will just replace what's evaporating around the clock, and you just refill a reservoir next to the tank once a week. I mean, that is just awesome. And the worst part is when people don't top off and they let the water level just drop and drop and drop. And like, yeah, it's low, I need to refill it. Then when they finally do refill it, because they're new and they don't have the understanding, the water's evaporating, the salinity is getting stronger and stronger and higher and higher. Then they finally dump in 3, 4, 5 or more gallons of fresh water all at once. This freshwater cloud goes into the tank and has to mix with the salt, obviously. And you're putting in way too much fresh water at one time, which could, irritate something on some type of livestock, at least momentarily. So it's best to be putting in a small amount. So, for example, if you don't have a top-off system, and if you do have a small aquarium, one of the best things you can possibly do is when you feed the tank each evening is at the same time pour in a little bit of water at the same time. You put in the food, you add a little bit of top-off water, whatever that is, a cup, a quart, a half gallon, whatever it is, and that's it. And the tank water level never changes in the aquarium. It stays at the same height. And if you don't know what the water height's supposed to be in your aquarium, or if you're running a sump, put a line where the normal water level is, and then you can just look and you can say, oh, the water's below the line. Let me add a little bit of water, get it back up to the line where it belongs. Okay, so when does the newbie finally become qualified to know what they're talking about and be ready to take on these bigger hurdles? I would say when their tank has become boring is a good indicator that they're ready to take on a new challenge. If the tank is just doing great, then my number one question always is, why are you trying this new thing out if your tank is doing great? Don't change a thing. Don't change what you're doing. Don't change your methods, because what you're doing is successful. But if you're bored to tears and you just have no love for your tank anymore and you don't want to reset it, like literally take everything out and start with all new corals or something like that, then yes, a new challenge might be in the works for you, and that would be something that you should start doing homework on and read up on, hopefully in multiple locations, so that way you can glean the knowledge. Now, I'm going to take this away from saltwater for a second. When I wanted to build my fire pit, I must have watched 8 or 10 different videos on YouTube from different content creators trying to understand how they were doing it and what tricks they were using to figure it out. And I ended up loving this one video by a guy named Hacksman, and I probably watched that video twice. But I wanted to get as much information in my head before I bought the first thing, so that way I'd have the best chance for success. And then, eventually I went to the store and I bought all the stuff and I built mine. I made a video about it and people watch it. But if I just watched one video and said, okay, I know what I'm doing, that's not good. And I would have had more issues. But I was able to glean knowledge from multiple authors, so to speak. And that way I could make something once and be done. That's the other thing. I don't like doing things over and over and over. The learning curve is not my favorite, and I much rather get as much knowledge up front before I spend $1 or spend a minute on the actual project itself, so that way when I start, I can just complete it. And that has been my way of living my whole life. When I was a kid, I was able to do things my father couldn't. For example, he bought a new house. He took me out to I was running around the house looking at all the new things, and I went on the back patio, and there was a barbecue that was built into like a ceramic tile countertop thing, and he was told when he bought the house that that the grill didn't work. And I said, oh, okay. Now, how old was I at that point? I'm going to guess 13 or 14 years old. And I stuck my head underneath and I looked at where the gas line was, and I looked at the tube leading up to the grill. And then I opened the grill and I looked at the top and looked at the burners and moved some of the lava rock out of my way and moved something, and I looked at that. And then I came inside and told my dad I know what's wrong with it and we can fix it. And he says, how on earth would you know that? I was like, And then I somehow, I don't even know what I fixed, but I acquired whatever it was at the hardware store, put it together, and solved the problem. And my dad was like, I just can't believe you know that. I could never do that. He's like, I absolutely have no mechanical knowledge whatsoever. And here, this just came out of your head? I'm like, well, I looked at it and I figured it out. And he was just like, it's unbelievable. And I repeated that many times. And he always was, he found it remarkable that he thought I should get into engineering when I grew up. Go to college, become an engineer, whatever the hell that is. To me, an engineer was the guy that ran the train on the tracks, okay? But I know there's engineering and engineering degrees and all this stuff. I'm not sure that I would have appreciated a life of looking at blueprints or designing things, in CAD. I don't know that I would have liked that. I kind of like the hands-on stuff. I've been doing hands-on my entire life. And I'm very much about logistics. And I'm always trying to think, somebody says, I want this, this, and this. I'm like, yeah, but how are you going to do that? And how are you going to reach that? And how is that going to work exactly in your mind so I can build what you're asking for? So, that's just me. And when it comes to getting knowledge about vodka dosing, I would tell you to go read the article that came out probably in 2008? Two guys wrote this fantastically detailed, super long, complicated article. And I told anyone, if you're vodka dosing, you need to read that first. That is the Bible of how to dose vodka. And then all the other shortcut ones where people have said, oh, all you have to do is this. That's fine if you need some cliff notes, but you really need to know the topic well before you risk your livestock doing it. And that type of mentality is what differentiates a knowledgeable hobbyist from a newbie. A newbie will just be told, do this, and they parrot it. They go do it. As a matter of fact, parroting is the worst thing we see in the Facebook groups, where someone will say, there's a problem going on in the aquarium. I don't know what it is, but I have these bugs. And everyone's like, you need to destroy that with fire. And everyone says, kill it, put it in the sump, rip it out. I'm like, there's a lot of things that don't hurt your tank that are actually really interesting and part of the ecosystem that is a reef tank. And while you may have the occasional downside of that thing living in your tank, more than likely it is beneficial on some level. If it didn't help in some form or fashion, it wouldn't exist on this planet, because everything has a purpose. So I'm going to say, that's how it should be. That's how you, don't just parrot what you read because someone else said it. Now, if you've lived it, that's totally different. Now you're sharing your experience, and hopefully you're explaining more detail why this did not work for you. And, I can do that with lots of things myself. I can say, I used Nopox, and it didn't work. Okay? I could just say that. Or I could explain, I used it for 9 months. I went through 6 bottles. my experience was this pink stuff everywhere inside my sump that looked like spider webs in every direction and clogging up the intake impeller of my return pump and clogging up within the impeller or propeller section of every Vortec pump I had. And then they would say, well, you overdosed it. And yet mathematically, I did not. I never dosed as much as I was recommended to use because I did not want to overdose. I did not have a good experience with the product, and I tried it for a long time. 9 months is a long time to try out a product. And so at this point, I can say, yes, I used it and it didn't work. I also have a tank sitter who swears by it and says it's fantastic. But then at one point, he was having a problem with nitrate in his tank. So he went to his beloved Nopox, and he was using it, and he says, Mark, I'm having a real problem. It's got pink stuff everywhere. I was like, exactly! That's what happened to me! And he's like, it didn't do this last time. I'm like, I don't know. I didn't do it last time. All I know is that I tried for a good duration with, a serious attempt, and I asked others, what they were doing, how they were doing it, and I didn't have any success with it. And I even wrote Red Sea and asked for help. And the only piece of advice they gave me, but at this point I was so fed up with cleaning all this pink crap out of my sump that I was done. I wasn't going to put another drop in. I mean, just because they gave me an answer doesn't mean I was going to say, okay, that changes everything. I'm all in. I was fed up. But they said if you were to skim wetter, that would help. And I was like, that is the one thing I didn't do. I didn't change my protein skimmer to really pull out a lot of liquid daily. I wanted to pull out waste. And I basically set it and forget it. I don't touch my skimmer's water level hardly at all. I mean, man, twice a year? I barely touch the knob. I mean, it's almost never because it's just removing what it needs to remove. So that nice piece of advice, I wish I'd known it 9 months sooner or 8 months or 7 months or 6 months. But when they finally told me at this point where I was, at my wit's end and like I'm done. So that was my experience, but there are probably thousands of people that use Nopox and it works great for them. And then there's probably 1,000 people that used it and didn't like the experience, probably. So, you've got that. But to just say, I read that it's bad for your tank, doesn't help the conversation. Other than if you could link them to where that was said, so that the original poster can go read up on whoever initiated the conversation about how it's bad for the tank. Okay, that's a totally different thing again, because now you're being helpful. This is where things change from being a newbie to someone that knows things. And ultimately, we want to make the best choices at the right time in our personal hobby. So that's where I am on that topic. And I just wanted to emphasize that keep reading. Keep reading. Buy books. Get Coral Magazine. Subscribe to Coral Magazine. Be current on what's going on. Learn. I mean, look, we had this issue here about filtration that we did last year. This one here, the German articles that we got, because this comes from the German Koralle, which means coral in German. There were several articles written by Dieter Brockmann and Daniel Knopp. And Daniel Knopp was talking about the importance of bioballs and trickle filters. And I thought, people still use those? Maybe in 2004. What is going on in 2024? I don't know one person with a wet dry. Not one. Maybe freshwater, it's still gangbusters, but because I know nothing about freshwater. But for saltwater, I don't know anyone running a trickle filter. I don't know one human being. Not one. So I was kind of really stymied that this kept coming up, or that we had these multiple articles about it. And I went to Matt Peterson and said, look, we're going to need more. This is not enough. I mean, for this issue, we need a story that talks about filtration in 2024. And Matt said, that's a great idea. I said, I think, or maybe he did, one of us, the two of us came up with it together maybe, that we were going to interview companies that build filtration in the United States and ask them what works, what doesn't, what's popular, what's your best item for your brand. What is the one thing your company makes that no other company makes? What got you into building filtration in the first place? And what about wet dries? Where do you stand on that? And we ended up doing all these interviews that were 2 hours long with 5 different company CEOs. And we came up with a fantastic article that went deep into filtration for saltwater aquariums. And it fleshed out where I felt that the magazine was lacking when it came to content. And we do that with every issue. So, our newest issue that you saw earlier, this one here, Rock Your Reef, this one had multiple stories about rock. But I wanted some kind of a story about all the rock you could, well, actually, I keep saying and I apologize because this one was Matt's brainchild. He really wanted a story that went into every type of rock you could possibly get in the U.S. and how you would install it in your tank. What different ways are there to install it, to bind it together, that kind of thing. And so we ended up coming up with this one story that is right. It's not here. Here it is. And I loved how it came out. It's this story right here. So this is called Shopping for Reef Rock. It's basically a buyer's guide for 2025. And we have something like 13 different companies in here that you can buy rock from, whether it's dry rock or live rock, or man-made rock, or natural, or harvested from the earth. And it was really great. So that was a fantastic way to give the magazine better content than what we initially started with. And we, like I said, we do that with every issue. But the point is that we're also trying to provide information for a new person, a newbie, to get more knowledge in their head, as well as to provide good, solid content for someone that's been in the hobby a long time, such as myself, that would read this and say, this is really good stuff. And look, I read the stories multiple times before they go to press. And when I do that, I'm like, wow, this is so cool. And you would think, since I've been in this since 97, you would have thought by now I've heard it all and there's nothing new out there. There's always something new out there. So I wanted to share that with you. And now I'm going to show you something new that I saw this week. Look at that. If you are not looking at this because you're listening to the show through audio only, there's a photograph of a fingertip where you can see the fingerprint. And on it are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 urchins of different sizes, all arranged in a circle, like some kind of a Heroes logo from the old TV show Heroes. It is so cool to see these tiny urchins going from the smallest to the largest, but still fitting on a fingertip, okay? So I asked Jamie Craggs, would you please take a picture of one of these adorable urchins on the coral fragment that you're trying to clean off? So he did this for me. It says, Mark Levinson, just for you. And you can see a frag plug in the background because you can see the coralline marks on it, and you see a little bit of green algae. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 patches of SPS that's growing off this frag plug. Because what Jamie Craggs does is he collects the sperm and eggs of corals that are spawning, and then he settles it into an aquarium with a bunch of surfaces, and the larvae land on these plugs and start splitting and dividing and becoming more cells and turning into coral. And he is all in on this project. Well, one of the things that comes up is as the little bits, I mean, these are dots of life growing on a 1-inch frag plug. The disc is 1 inch wide, right? And this little dot of skin with maybe a polyp on the top, right, is 1 millimeter wide. It's so small, you only see it with a super magnifying lens, like a macro lens on a camera, or you're putting it under a microscope to where you can really magnify it to show the size. I'm not sure how he got this shot, but he took the tiny urchin off of whoever's fingertip that was, and he put it between to show how it's cleaning the algae away so the algae won't choke out the new life of the SPS coral. So here's another shot of it a little bit better, so you can see it bigger. I believe that urchin is 2 millimeters wide. 2 millimeters! The urchin is this wide. Okay, it's this wide. It's so tiny and adorable, and it's snacking on the green substance between those corals so that the corals will have the ability to grow and not be stopped. And I love it. So they're breeding urchins, and they're breeding the tiniest of urchins, obviously, or getting the little guys into the tank as early as possible to start munching on algae, where we hobbyists would want our urchin to be the size of, I don't know, a grape, a golf ball, or larger to work on your reef, right? He doesn't want that. He doesn't need a big animal that literally is bigger than the frag plug. He needs it to go in between the tissue and clean out the little bit of algae. So anyway, I love that. I had to share it with you guys. Now, I want to give you guys a quick update on my reef tank. So I've got another thing to show you here in a moment. Let me just jump back to here. So the 400 gallon. Spock, who I mentioned to you guys about 2 weeks ago, or maybe last week, I said I was super concerned about her health, that she was losing weight dramatically, and it was making me think this was the end of her life. I mean, I just really believed that. And I kind of wanted to prepare you guys, because I know many of you have followed Spock now for a long time through the various stories I've shared, the pictures I've shared, the videos. You know, you see her in every video in the background. When I'm showing the tank, she's always in the frame, you know. And I know I need to be putting more videos of my tank up. I'm not happy with the way my tank looks, and so I haven't been sharing it. It's not hideous, it's just not great. And but I guess I need to do it anyway, just to be truthful and honest with you and let you know that, you know, it doesn't look perfect all the time, because they don't. But anyway, Spock. I made an effort to try to hand feed her, and that wasn't working. I would hold the food, like the Rogers Reef food, and she would take a bite off, and she'd kind of gnaw on it and then spit that out, and then inhale it again and spit it out. Or she would bite off a piece, and then she would try to eat the piece that was floating and would miss it because her vision is off. And because, you know, because one eye's gone and the other eye apparently isn't doing well either. So she's having a problem targeting on food, and she wasn't just eating the food out of my hand like I was thinking, well, this will do it. I can give her banana. I can give her the Rogers Reef food. I can hold a piece of krill, you know, let her chew off pieces. But if she's not swallowing and it's not going into her gut, she has no future. And I started to think maybe somehow something is going on internally in my fish that I've had for so long. You know, I buy fish so rarely that to get a new thing in my tank is kind of weird. And anyway, I knew that she loves nori. And I've been using the nori nibbler now for a couple of years or so. And I even had them print me a larger grid so that her mouth would fit in there to pull pieces off. And she goes straight to it and picks at it. But so does the purple tang, the yellow tang, the Achilles tang, the coal. They're all eating off of it. So she's a big fish, but she's not aggressive. She's more laid back, and she'll even get out of their way while they go at it voraciously, and then she'll go, you know, push her way in when there's an opportunity to get another bite or two. But I really feel like she wasn't getting the lion's share of the food. So I started to put, and so when I say I use a sheet of nori a day, I'm talking about the full sheet. Like the big sheets I sell that come from Two Little Fishies. And I cut the sheet in half. And half a sheet fits on the nori nibbler. And the other half of the sheet I would then put in the Two Little Fishies feeding clip, whatever that's called, the mega. I know there's a name for it. I'm drawing a blank, but it's the feeding magnet that they offer. They have a large one and they have a standard one. And what I do is I roll it up basically, sort of like a cigarette, and then I break it or I bend it in half, and I jam that in the clip, and I clamp down on the clip, and I put it in the tank. And Spock will eat the nori off of that clip or off the nibbler. And I was putting one on both every single day. The change in her in the last week is unbelievable. She's almost back to her normal size again. I'm like, wow, because it wasn't like I wasn't putting nori in the tank. I was probably putting in 3, maybe 4 times a week. But since I really ramped up what I was doing and putting it in there, you know, basically one full sheet each day, and she can go to this one or that one, and she can just keep attacking it, good vision or not, because she knows where it is, has really made a difference. And she's way thicker, which is great, because her stomach was sunken in. I was basically seeing her rib cage, if that's what the bony structure of a fish is called. And I was like, man, this does not look good. I think I'm going to lose her any day now. And not only since she's been feeding greedily on the food, she's also swimming more actively. She's not starving. She's not emaciated. She's got energy. So I'm really glad that I figured that out in time, you know, that I could step up her feeding regime and find something that would work for her. Because, you know, like I've said repeatedly, she's over 20 years old in my care. That's a long time. And when I read about Nassau tangs in Coral Magazine some time back, I learned that they live up to 35 years. So she still has 15 years ahead of her. Well, let's say 13. She had to be 2 years old before I got her, right? So anyway, that's some good news. I want to share that with you. I had a real frustrating time trying to deal with the glass on my aquarium. It's been getting dirty and my cleaning magnet wasn't getting it off. And I have this thing I always used to scrape with, and I could not find the blades. Because over the last 6 months, every time I found the package of blades, and I mean another package, because I always buy them at the shows, and then I put them somewhere. And I kept scattering them everywhere. So they were everywhere. And so as I kept finding them, I kept putting them in the same spot all together. Then I couldn't find the together spot. I was like, okay, great. They're all in one spot, and I have no idea where that spot is. And I went through this bin. I went through that bin. I went through this rack. I went through this basket. I went over here. I looked over here. I looked where my test kits were. I was like, where on earth did I put all these blades? I'm really annoyed at myself. And finally, 2 nights ago, I went to another spot, and I dug deep, and there were all 6 packages of these blades, which means I have like 4 years worth of blades. And I was able to put one on my mag scraper, my mag float scraper, and go over every inch of the tank again. And now I can see the tank clearly. And some of it was on, I mean, I had some of this brown algae that grows on the glass. It's super stubborn, that is really hard to remove. I mean, it holds on like cement. It's crazy stuff compared to the green sheen. And the other thing is my tank has been growing a greenish type film algae rapidly. Like I'll clean the glass, and then 3 hours later, there's a little bit of a green sheen if you look at the length of the tank, and the glass is a little fogged up, and I'm like, wow, it's already back. Those types of blooms do occur in reef tanks. They're not something you can predict. They're not really something you can magically erase, even though some people swear by UVs as a solution. But whatever, I don't care. If it goes through a spell where a couple of weeks or a month where the glass wants to get green really fast, I don't care. I'll just clean the glass a little bit more frequently. But the problem was the brown stubborn stuff was really like, I had striations like the back of my reef tank that I don't clean that glass as frequently as I do the front, because the front is the front. And so the back's like, I'll get it later. I'm tired. I just did the front. I'll do that later. Well, the back of my tank was starting to look like zebra stripes with these brown striations. It was just like, and I was just like, man, I need to clean this off. Where are those blades? So I chiseled it all off, and now I can see everything. So I want to show you a picture of something I can see now. And it is right here. So if you look really, really closely, that is a big fungia. And down at the bottom, in the shadows, that is a tape measure. And that fungia is 6 inches across. I have several 6-inch across fungias in my tank. These are fungias that I've been growing from crumbs in my tank for the last decade. Every year, so originally I had a coral skeleton, and the coral, I had the coral, it died. And I left the skeleton in the tank because I'd heard if you leave the fungia disc in your tank somewhere in a shaded area, not a prominent spot, that after a few months it'll bud some babies. And it did. It was amazing. And it would spit out these little tiny green flowers between those fins of the fungia coral. And you just had these little tiny, I keep acting like they're stems. They're not. They're like little flowers sitting on top. There's like one here, one here, one here, one here. And so you might see 4 or 5. And then there's other times where you might see 20 or 30 on that one plate, that one dead skeleton with all these little bits of life. And then they grow, they get bigger, and they pop off completely on their own accord, and they land on the sand, and they become bigger individuals. And I remember one year I basically reached into the tank Saturday morning, early in the morning, and I took out 20 fungias, put them in a bucket, went to the DFW Mass, which is my club, frag swap, and I just put a piece of paper on the side of the bucket that said $20 each. And it didn't matter what size it was. It didn't matter if one was a double. If it was tiny, it was 20. If it was big, it was 20. If it was 2, it was 20. And I sold them all. And I made $400 that day. And I was like, that was awesome. I should sell coral. But I knew I won't because it's too much work and I hate it. So it was just nice to do that, to get those gone. And it was super easy to get rid of them. Then another year I took 20 to Dallas North Aquarium, and I said, I just need store credit. and they took them and I don't know, they sell them to other people or they go in their clients' tanks or something like that. And then, again, right now my tank probably has 20 in there again. And those are some big ones. Now, there's some smaller ones in my tank too, and they're in different spots. But those giant ones are really impressive to look at. I'm like, man, they're awesome. So I'm going to ship a couple to a couple of people I know so they can put them in their tanks. And that way they just kind of live on. But the cool thing is that if that coral dies in their care and they leave the skeleton in there, it will sprout babies. It will resurrect more. It's just the gift that keeps on giving forever. And I just love that coral, and I think it's really, really cool. All right. Another update about my tank is the salt water. I finally mixed it up. I think I've mentioned probably 2 weeks ago I'm going to mix up a batch of salt water so I can do water changes like on this tank behind me, and that little tank needs a water change desperately, and I need to clean the glass. I mean, it's just filthy little beast of a tank. I need to do a water change on Caitlin's tank. I'll show you Caitlin's tank as well, which is still dino free, which looks great. I think I can take the UV off of there. I can reach in there and rip out some nuisance algae that's irritating me, and I can start planting some corals in there. And hopefully I will get a new fish for the tank soon, besides that one goby down on the sand in the dead center. But the dinos are gone completely. And then, all the other gear, you can see the Nero 5 is nice and clean. Now I need to clean the heater, and I need to clean that other Seche pump in the background there too, and clean the back glass, take out the frag rack, just plant the few zoanthids that survived. So that tank will be on track soon as well. But it's just nice to be able to make progress on various things that are going on. But the saltwater situation, so I have this big vat. It holds 250 gallons of water, and the float valve snapped off during a cleaning one day. And while I removed the part that broke, I didn't put another float in there because I don't think I had one. And then, I've just been cognizant not to let it overfill. And a couple of months ago, I overfilled it for the first time in my life. And water, of course, went under the wall and into the garage and down the driveway. And that was that. But the container was too full to add salt. And I kept saying, I need to pump water out. And everything I have to do, it's all about time. How much time is this going to take? You would think, how long would it take to pump out, a few gallons? Well, I have to get the hose. I got to run it outside. I got to hook it to a pump. I got to go up a ladder, put the pump in, and turn it on. Okay? That's a few minutes of my time. So anyway, last night I was like, it's not cold outside right now. We're in a lull. It's about to get really cold here, like down in the, 22 is going to be our low. But yesterday our weather was like 60, 65 or something. So last night around 10:30 at night, I was like, let me just do this. I know I should be feeding the fish, but let me just make this stupid salt water that I've been procrastinating on. And by the way, I found the funniest meme the other day. It said, I'm not procrastinating. What did it say? I'm doing side quests. And that is so me. So anyway, I got the tubing out. I hooked up the pump. I pumped out 15 gallons down the driveway. I lowered the water level to the 250 mark. I grabbed the phone to look up the salinity addition calculator to know how much salt I needed. It spit out, I needed 71 pounds of salt. I went out to the studio where all my Fritz salt is, and I grabbed each bag of salt and I weighed them, and then I added up all the ounces to figure out the total ounces I needed, which is not in front of me, but I feel like it was like 1,200 ounces. Yeah. And which comes out to like 71 pounds. And so I was weighing all the different bags of salt, and then I walked back inside with each bag of salt, and I poured them into the container, and it's mixing up. And today I'll double check salinity, but it should be 1.026, which is what I would expect it to be, because that calculator has never lied to me. So I will be able to, this evening, do water changes on all my systems, which will be really nice. First time of water change for 2025. And it'll definitely help this tank behind me here that has, it has filtration. I mean, it's got a sponge filter in the back. It's got a protein skimmer in there. And, of course, it's got live rock and stuff. But it's got the nasties, and it's got some hair algae. And it just needs some cleaning so I can start making it pretty, so it'll be pretty for you guys. But by the way, that project of getting the water out and putting the salt in took 35 minutes. And I knew it was going to take a half an hour of my time. And so I just did that. And then I fed all my fish after 11 o'clock at night. I had to run around and make sure I did everything before the lights shut off. But, okay, so that's all the updates on that. Then, my next little thing is a quick tip. I wanted to show you guys something I shared on social media here probably 48 hours ago. So this is the edge of my aquarium. If you look at the top of the picture, you'll see there is what looks like black trim. And then if you look dead center, that is the seam with some black silicone going vertically, and then behind is a black pipe, which is part of my return assembly pushing water into the tank. But there is a strip of black tape that goes underneath the black trim. That black tape was applied to my tank in 2013, so that's 12 years ago. I ordered it from Fast Signs, and the reason I did it is to avoid what I call light bleed, or the other definition is to hide the water line. When they built my aquarium, what they chose to do was to install the external overflow box on the aquarium, and then they put some acrylic on the inside of the aquarium with teeth, and the water line was lower than the plastic trim, and that's not my preference. When you build an aquarium, I want the water line to be hidden behind the trim so you don't see it. I don't want to see the edge of it. I don't want to see water spots. I don't want to see algae. I don't want to see anything. I want to see a beautiful box of water with no distractions, and absolutely do not like the light bleed that happens between the trim and the surface of the water. That little bit of light glaring out is a super distraction to me. It's a pet peeve. So when they told me they couldn't fix it with the construction of the tank, they said it's not an option. I said, okay, then I'm just going to go ahead and do this vinyl applique system. And all this is the same stuff that you would use to like put a logo on the back of a car. You know, it's the same type of vinyl. It's literally, I had it made at Fast Signs. The people that make signs for a living, I said, look, I want a 3/4 inch strip of black, flat, you know, like flat, like not glossy, or maybe matte is a better definition. I said, I need this flat matte material. I need it to be 3/4 of an inch tall. I need it to be over 80 inches long. And so they probably gave me, you know, a bunch of 96-inch strips, to be honest. And it wasn't cheap. I probably paid them $80 for this, these slivers, you know, because I was not going to just do it at the top. I was also going to do it at the bottom, because on the first 400-gallon that Marineland built for me, the silicone was wavy and it bugged me. The sand at the bottom, I keep saying salt, the sand at the bottom is white. And against the black wavy silicone, you have this weird wavy look. And I was like, why does that look like that? I hate it. So I thought, okay, I'm getting a new tank. I'm going to go ahead and order this vinyl, and it's going to go in the top and the bottom. It's going to hide the light bleed at the top. It's going to hide the wavy silicone at the bottom. Well, this time they did such a great job on the silicone on the bottom, it wasn't a factor, so I didn't need to put it there. But I did need it along the top, and I just put soapy water on the glass. I put soapy water on the back of the vinyl. I put it in place. I used a rubber squeegee, and I just spread it out and shifted it up to where it butted up against the black trim, the plastic trim, and completely hid that spot. Now, others might say, well, you could put something within the teeth of the overflow box to raise the water line. You can, but it will make the overflow box louder. And I know that for a fact, because I tried it on my previous tank. So this time I decided, no, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to do this just to hide it. And the best part is that it's invisible. And the side perk that's amazing about putting this vinyl on here is when you use your cleaning magnet, it just slides right over it, because the outside cleaning magnet, it's got like felt on the bottom, and that felt just rubs over it. It does no problem. You can literally clean all the way up to the trim at the top of the tank without any kind of issue whatsoever. It doesn't mess it up. And this stuff that I put on my tank 12 years ago, 13 years ago, right? No, 12 years ago, 2013. It's still, that's a picture from yesterday. That's not some old picture I found. That's yesterday. It still looks like the day I put it on. It's in perfect shape. It held up beautifully. And because I didn't use any along the bottom, if somehow I were to mess this up, I still have that vinyl that I bought in 2013, and I can put a new piece on there again. I even considered getting a black Sharpie and just hitting that little tiny fine line you see, but you only see it because of this angle I'm taking this picture. When you're standing in front of the tank, you don't see the line at all. It's just completely opaqued out, and it's a perfect little solution. And even a rimless tank, if you don't like seeing the water spots around the top of your aquarium, and you keep chipping it off, or you wipe it with a towel, or you take a razor blade and you get rid of the calcium buildup, you could get a wider piece of this stuff, like 2 inches wide, And you could apply it around the 3 sides of your aquarium and just completely hide the water line and the water spots and all that, and just be able to clean your tank and enjoy a really pretty reef without the ugly distraction along the top. Now, I got this from Fast Signs, like I said, but you can get vinyl pretty much anywhere. There's probably something you can buy on Amazon, and then you would just have to cut it yourself. Or maybe you know someone that has a Cricut machine and can cut you out a piece. It's very similar to applying window tint to windows, if that means anything to you. It's not hard to do. Anyone can do it. You just need to take your time, be meticulous, get all the air bubbles out, and you can have a beautiful tank as well. All right, that's the end of that topic. Now I've got another topic for you. So this is the final topic of the day. We've been talking for an hour. 1 hour. Okay. This one is going to be about the proper temperature for the reef tank. And I feel like there's a lot of opinions about what is proper. What is the ideal temperature for your tank? So let's get into it. The main part of choosing what temperature your aquarium is going to be is going to be the livestock that's in the aquarium. If you are keeping an aquarium that has Florida corals, you would then know roughly what the temperature around the Florida Keys is through a little bit of research. And you could say, yeah, I'm doing an entire biotope only about Florida, and I'm only going to keep the corals that I can legally get from Florida. I'm not trying to do anything illegal here. And I want my water temperature to be the ideal for those corals. And you do a little bit of homework, you find out, and then you say, okay, the average temperature seems to be, and then it is what it is. It could be it could be 78 degrees is the ideal temperature. And you could say, yeah, but it got up to 100 last year. Yes, it did. And corals died, okay? So throw that number away. It's a bad number. You might have heard from someone like, I've been in the hobby 30 years and I always recommend 81. It's like, why 81? And let's look at your tank and let's see how it looks. Is that the kind of tank I want to keep? And that really is helpful when you're getting advice from others, is to look at their tank, what they got running. And hopefully that will be their calling card and give you some inspiration, or maybe a warning that might not be the best advice for you. I will tell you that normally most articles and books are going to recommend somewhere between 77 and 79 degrees Fahrenheit. And I was basically there. I kept my tank around 78 all the time. A few years ago, 2 years ago, when I got the Japanese pygmy angelfish, I lowered the temperature of my tank down to 76 because that fish likes 75. And I was like, well, I'm going to be keeping this fish in my 400-gallon reef, but I don't want the reef to be 75. That seems really chilly compared to the corals I've been keeping and keeping successfully for a long time. I mean, I have some corals in my tank that I've had since 2003. One of my anemones is still with me from 2003, okay? I have the hammer corals in my reef are from 2004, 2005. My Blue Ridge coral, somewhere around 2004, still have a giant section of it in my tank. Those are just a few off the top of my head that I've been keeping forever. Acropora, they come and go, and that's just from making mistakes along the way. But I do have some that I've had for many, many years, and that's nice, right? I mean, I still have a little bit left of the Shadowcaster that dominated my reef all the way up to about 5 years ago. And it was this huge colony. It was insane. And that's when Dwayne came here and we removed the entire colony. And I just have a little bit left. I moved it to a different spot. It's not nearly as happy. It's been stung by anemones. It's just not doing as well as it did. But there's still some left. So it technically still counts as alive in my tank. But anyway, I lowered the temperature. I put the Japanese pygmy angelfish in the Peacemaker. And it was going to sit there for a few days before I released it. But then Eric Cohen from Tank Stop said, are you sure you want to put that in your 400-gallon tank? It's really small. I was like, absolutely. And he said, all right. He says, you could put it in a 20-gallon tank with a piece of live rock and just let it get bigger first. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. That's not what I want. And that's why I ended up buying Caitlin's Reef. Then I hung up the phone and I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe I'm being stubborn or stupid. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to set up a small tank for this fish. And I ordered some live rock that day. I went to Frank's and ordered a tank. The tank was delivered, or I picked up the tank the next day. The live rock showed up on my doorstep the next day, and I started the cycle while the fish sat in the peacemaker for 3 weeks. And after 21 days, all the numbers were perfect. I moved it into there, and it lived in that tank for 2 years. And then, unfortunately, a couple of months ago, it just abruptly died. And my only guess is that it got hit by the pistol shrimp, and that was it. I mean, it just took a hit to the brain and could not recover, because I don't understand why it died. The other fish in that tank did not die. And, or maybe the dinoflagellates. Maybe it ate some and hurt itself, and just internally. But the fish was still a juvenile when I took it out of the tank, and it was sad to lose it. But I never changed the temperature of my tank back to the higher temperature. So I've got this to show you. I think. I didn't label it. There it is. So here is my Apex graph, Fusion. The Apex uses an app called Fusion, and with Fusion, it shows my temperature. Now, a lot of times people share the graph. Like, look at the graph, look at the graph, look at the graph. The graph doesn't matter. What matters are the numbers at the bottom of the screen. If you look, my minimum is 75.9, so 76. My maximum, and this is for the last week, is 77.3. So my average tank temperature of the 400-gallon Reef for the last couple of years is, this is showing for the last week, okay? So realize if I keep pushing the slider back, I think I can go back up to a total of 90 days. I can always see these averages. But for the last week, the average was 76.5. I'm keeping my tank right between 76 and 77 degrees day in, day out. And it's pretty consistent. You can see this last 24 hours. It's a little bit off, and I don't even know why. But whatever. Oh, maybe it was me going in and out doing the water stuff and letting cold air in. I don't know. But I basically have a 1 degree swing. And that's what I wanted to emphasize with you, because when you're keeping a reef tank, your temperature is going to go up usually during the daytime for a couple of reasons. Maybe the heat coming off the lights over your tank could be adding warmth. Could be the temperature in the home is a little bit warmer because you're turning up the temperature while you're walking around, but you turn it down at night when you're sleeping because you're under the covers. I don't know. There's different reasons people do different things. I tend to keep my temperature locked to the same temperature in my house all the time. My thermostat right now is set to 72. And the heater comes on to get it up to 72. And that's that. Now, all throughout the summer, my living room will get warmer because that's where the 400 gallons of water is, first of all. And also, I run a dehumidifier that is very important and very necessary in my home because of the humidity in Texas during our summer months. In the winter, I can empty the dehumidifier like once every 3 weeks. In the summer, I have to empty it twice a day. Every 12 hours, it's full and turned itself off. And when it's running, it adds heat to the living room and makes the room warmer, which would warm up the tank, of course, because if the ambient temperature of the room is hotter, the water temperature is going to gradually rise as well. But I can't show you what my temperature of the tank was last summer because I can't go back that far. I would have to work off of memory. But I do know that I'm very cognizant of this. So like, for example, what I choose to do is run the dehumidifier during the night while I'm asleep and when I'm not in the living room, running around doing things. And then during the daytime, if it runs for a while, then I'd like it to be off by noon and not add heat to the house during the daytime because the air conditioner is already fighting the heat from outside coming down from the Texas sun that's blazing. And, when it's 100 to 110 degrees outside, I don't need to be adding more heat inside my house from a dehumidifier all day long. So I choose to run it at night. But I still am aware of keeping my tank temperature correct no matter what it is going on. And I also stick as close to the number that I've selected. Now, I don't need to be at 76 as my low anymore. I could bump it up because I didn't end up putting the angelfish in there. I just never did. And my corals have grown monstrously in my 400 gallon. And that's when my tank is so full of life to where I need to go clean it all out. But so keeping your tank a little bit cooler isn't detrimental. And will you get great growth from it? Based on my personal experience of doing this for the last couple of years, the answer is yes. When I lost a bunch of SPS corals and had to plant new ones in my tank, the growth I got out of my tank was insane. And people are like, holy crap, how did you do that so fast? Because I planted a bunch of stuff that was decent size, not little 1-inch frags. They were things that were, a few inches in size, first of all. And I had also put in a few things that were fist size. But it was a matter of time, and the tank just got gorgeous. Let's see if I can find some old video I have here that I could show. I don't know. This one says January 24th. This is probably a year ago. And my tank is now twice that. This one actually says a year ago, so it probably was more like November. And I had tons of SPS growth. And again, the temperature of the tank was 76 to 77 degrees. Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of examples of, a tank running at cooler water and doing well and being colorful and growing like crazy. At this point, my tank is just maxed out. I don't even have any video. I just don't like the way my tank looks, so I haven't been sharing it. But here, nope, that's not even current. Let's try this one. That's current. I mean, that's September, but that's what my tank looks like now, and it's pretty stuffed. And the coral in the front, right in front of Spock's face, that one is getting stung by anemones right now. And you can actually see one anemone right there. Its little tentacles are wiggling in the dark shadow there. And I've got to just rip them all out and cut away what's died and just, clean it all up. But yeah, so the reef is doing just fine, doing its thing at a cooler temperature. And there's just not a reason to keep the tank temperature warmer. Now that I've said all that, I want to come back to you here. If you choose to keep your tank at 79, 80, 81, you're dancing close to the danger zone of if the tank were to suddenly rise exponentially to like 85. And 85 is the cutoff point when you start to lose things because the oxygen level drops and the fish start dying. And so if your tank is getting close to 85, the first thing you have to do is grab an air pump and a heavy weighted air stone, get in the tank and start oxygenating the water or whatever you want to call that, because I know we're not adding oxygen, okay? But we're creating something that breaks up the surface of the water and creates gas exchange. I just wish we were actually putting in oxygen. Like more oxygen. That's what I'd like to think. But that's not factually true. So adding the air stone will definitely help your livestock if the tank gets too warm. But if you're keeping your tank at a lower temperature, you have more of a window before the tank gets too hot. Now, how do you stay ahead of it so that the tank doesn't overheat accidentally without your knowledge? That's really, really important. So there's different ways to be notified. The old school method, you go to Amazon and you order something called the Big Temp Alert. It's a big thermometer. It's this big, it's digital, and you stick it up on the wall and you run the wire into your water somewhere in your aquarium, your aquarium or your sump. And there's going to be two numbers on the screen. The top number is the temperature of the room. Don't be misled. The number under it that says the word out next to it, that's for that outside temperature, because the Big Temp Alert is designed to hang on the wall of the house, the exterior wall of the house, with the wire hanging outside in the weather. And you look at it and it says, oh, the temperature of my house is 74 degrees. I'm too hot. And then you look at the outside and it says 107. You're like, I feel fine. Or it says 31. You're like, oh, it's terrible. I'm not going outside. That out temperature, that's the one that matters for your aquarium. If you need to put tape over the other one so you don't get confused, you could do that. I never did. I just knew to look at the out number. Now, the reason I mentioned the Big Temp Alert, it uses a couple of AA batteries. You hang it up on the wall above your aquarium. You can see from across the room what the temperature is every single second of the day. And there was an alarm built into it. If it got outside of a range that you picked, it would make a noise. It would chirp. And you're like, oh, my tank got too hot. Oh, my tank got too cold. And I need to make a change. I need to fix a heater. I need to turn on a fan. I need to do something. And so you are alerted. There are other things out there like the Hydros, the Apex that you can use that has an app that will send you a notification and say the temperature is outside of range. It's too warm. It's too cold. Another trick, you could plug in some kind of a smart device, and there's plenty of them out there on the market. People are buying stuff from everywhere these days. And you can plug in a device that if the tank temperature gets too cold or too hot, the outlet becomes live, and you could plug into that outlet a red light bulb, okay? Somehow just a socket with a light bulb, stick it somewhere, and if the tank is in alarm status, a red light comes on, and when you look at the tank, it's glowing red. And you're like, oh, something's wrong. Let me go look. So that's that. That's another way of staying on top of things. And then, of course, if you're crazy, you could put a siren on that plug. It could just start wailing, and you could hear it from across the house if your house is that big. Mine is not that big. I can hear almost anything from every room. Trust me, I can almost hear a needle drop. So I'm hyper aware of what's going on in my surroundings. But the red light thing is a nice method that's visual. And it works because even a family member could say, hey, there's a red light on your tank. And you're like, oh, let's go see what's going on. You can check into it. There are different zones of the different oceans on this planet that run at different temperatures. But the corals that you choose to buy, that you put in your tank, that's what you should be matching the temperature to, not necessarily the zone they're from. So I know that sounds like doublespeak. Let's just say there's a spot in Indonesia that runs about 81 degrees. And then you also know that Jason Fox got a coral from that exact island and you bought it, so that's why your tank needs to be 81 degrees. You don't really have to be 81 degrees. Corals are adaptable. They can definitely handle a lower temperature. You might ask Jason Fox, what temperature do you keep your aquariums at because you sell beautiful corals? And he might say, yeah, I keep them at 79.5. You're like, okay. So the 81 it came from, you're not doing that. You're doing 79.5. All right, and that looks really pretty, and I bought it from you, so I think I'll do that. And then you talk to another friend, and he's got that exact same coral. I'm like, hey, what do you keep your tank temperature at? And he goes, oh, I keep it around 77. And you're like, huh, but I read that it's from 81 in that spot. That atoll is at 81. And he's like, yeah, but my tank's been doing great, and I've had this, and I've fragged it 40 times, and I've made so much money. And you're like, huh, okay. So 77 is possible. So you see, there is some room to decide what's ideal, but ultimately, you're going to have to say, what's the best situation for my aquarium in my house? And there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One thing to say, I want my aquarium to one temperature, but there's the other thing is that what is the temperature of the room the aquarium is in? Because your family might be notoriously cold all the time and is always pushing the temperature up. And they might be keeping the house at 80 degrees, and you want to keep your tank at 75 or 76 or 77 or 78 or whatever number it is that you've picked. Well, you can't make it colder without owning a chiller. So now you've got a chiller running, which benefits you because it's pushing out heat out the back so that your family members can be nice and toasty warm. So you do have that situation. But really what you want to avoid at all costs is a big temperature swing. That is the worst thing you can do to an aquarium. And I remember back in the day, every time there was a tank of the month, and they came out every single month. Reefkeeping.com did a beautiful reef tank every month, a huge write-up, tons of beautiful pictures. They would talk about the equipment they used, and they would talk about their water parameters, and they would talk about their temperatures, and how they ran a chiller, and they did this, and they did that. And I was always really keen to see what did they keep their stuff at. And there was guys out there that could keep their tank within half a degree 24 hours a day. And I was like, that's insane, because we were using metal halides, and they put off tons of heat. And I just couldn't believe people could keep it within half a degree. And I couldn't. My tank would wander 2.5 degrees a day. And it grew into a beautiful reef. I also made it a point never to let it go more than 2.5 degrees a day. But it cooled off at night and it got warm in the daytime, and that was it day in, day out. And I'll also mention this. In the winter, my entire aquarium was cooler than in the summer. So for example, if my tank was 78 to 80.5 daily in the summer, in the winter it was 77 to 79.5 in the winter. It was a full degree different because of lack of humidity, outside forces causing heat on the home and taxing the system. But it was the same lighting, it was the same heaters, it was the same fish, same coral, same pumps. I didn't change the gear. I didn't really even change the thermostat when you think about it. I mean, I tried to keep myself comfortable year round, but you are running an air conditioner during the summer and you are running a heater during the winter, and that slight variance in the HVAC system will definitely affect the ambient temperature of the room, which can affect the aquarium. It is okay for your reef to be a little bit cooler in the winter and a little bit warmer in the summer, because that's literally how it is in the coral reefs too. Coral reefs are not in summer conditions year round. They're not. They do have a little bit of a cooling period in the off season. And they have the rainy season, which is another cooling period. So there is that. Don't rule it out as a thing, because it is possible. But keeping as tight as possible is ideal. And the fact that mine swings in like 1 to 1.2 degrees a day, I'm very happy with that, and I'm glad that I've been able to maintain it minimally. I mean, literally, my tank has 3 heaters. Oh, let's talk about heaters for a second. Someone recently mentioned that his 500 watt heater failed and the tank was 97 degrees. 97. When he found out, he immediately started to pull out the fish that had died. He had a couple that survived, which is amazing. He was lowering the temperature of the tank, and it was some thread I saw on Facebook. And he was taking water out of the aquarium and putting it in the refrigerator to cool it off and then putting it back in the tank. And everyone's like, why aren't you just putting ice in there? Which is what I would have done. But I was thinking, and I did ask, but he didn't reply to me. I said, what size aquarium do you have that had a heater that could raise it to 97? Because 500 watts of heat, depending on the size of the body of water, could either cook it or it could just warm it up. And if you are using a heater that's too big for your tank, it's going to affect the temperature of the tank one day the hard way. It's going to do something bad. It's really important that you are not using too much heat to warm the water. So, for example, if this person, I don't know what size aquarium it was, but if he had a 100-gallon tank, he should have had a 300-watt combination of heaters, which could be a 200-watt heater and a 100-watt heater. It could be 250-watt heaters. They should combined add up to a total of 300 watts. And the reason I say combined is because you should always have 2 heaters at half strength, because if one of those heaters sticks in the on position, it doesn't have the oomph to cook your tank to get it to 97 degrees. Your tank might creep up an extra degree, possibly 2, and you're like, wow, why is my tank getting so warm? It's never done that. You investigate, you're like, that heater never turns off. I think I found my problem. But it wasn't enough to do damage because you only had half the wattage on a heater. My system, I've been doing the same thing ever since I set it up. So I first set up my tank, my 400-gallon. I set it up in 2011, and I set it up with 3 heaters. Each heater is 300 watts. That's 900 watts a heater I'm using for a system of total liquid water volume of everything, which is the anemone cube, the 400-gallon, and the sump beneath, and that's 450 gallons of liquid water volume. It is not 400-gallon tank plus a 60-gallon tank plus an 80-gallon sump. That's not the math. That you have to take the inside measurement of the aquarium minus displacement for sand and rock, plus the water of the secondary tank, plus whatever water is available in the sump. You add that all up, and on my system, that's 450 liquid gallons. That's the true water volume of my system, and I only use 900 watts of heat, which isn't even enough. It's less than enough. If I wanted to have 3 watts per gallon, 450 times 3 would be 1,350 watts. So basically, 4 300-watt heaters would be better than 3 300-watt heaters. But my 3 heaters come on, they run for about an hour and 20 minutes once a day, and they just push it up that half a degree that needs to get up there so it's not going to get too cool at night. And then when we had the big ice storm and all the power's out and 5 million, 20 million people didn't have power, whatever that giant number was, and power's out for a week, I ran off a generator. And with the generator running outside, I ran a huge extension cord inside like I always do. I plugged in all my heaters into the sump. I had 5 300-watt heaters, so now I had 1,500 watts of heat, which is the equivalent of 1 hairdryer that your wife uses for her hair, right? 1,500 watts of heat, kept the tank at 77 degrees, and my house was 57 degrees. I was cold. My tank was nice and perfect, and it did not get too cool. I was very lucky. I didn't lose my reef during that. Many people lost their livestock. They lost everything, and I was able to keep it alive because of what I do. So you want to make sure that you're not using too big a heater. And the same thing is if you have a hospital tank or a quarantine tank, and you're like, I have an extra heater, I'm going to stick it in here. And it could be like a 13-gallon container you're using for quarantine, and you put in like a 100-watt heater. It's way too much heat. Or you might have a spare 250-watt heater that fits at an angle in your 20-gallon tank, it's way too much. And if something goes wrong with a heater, you're just going to cook whatever's in there and you're going to kill it. So instead, you want to make sure that you're using the right amount of heat, which I've always recommended 3 watts per gallon. And you might say, no, in our area, we do need 5 watts per gallon. Well, if that's the case, that's the case. But divide it by 2 heaters, because that way, if one sticks on, it doesn't have the ability to cook your tank. The odds of both sticking on at the same time are kind of limited. And then if you can plug the heaters into a reliable controller, and a lot of people are loving the Inkbird, but then a lot of people are complaining about the Inkbird. So I can't really recommend that one. I ran one briefly and I wasn't impressed. I've always plugged my heaters directly into the Apex, and then on this tank it's plugged into the Hydros, and I set the temperature of the heater for the heater, but then if it gets out of range, the outlet that the heater's plugged into goes dead because the controller says, nope, no more electricity for you, you're too warm. And that has been my method of running heat on my tanks for forever, since 2004. So that is just the best thing you can do, and that will protect it from getting too hot. All right. And then, of course, the other crisis thing is if it's summer, it's crazy hot, power's out, AC's out, whatever's broken, you can float giant bags of water in, giant bags of frozen ice, frozen ice, I heard it myself, giant bags of ice in your sump, or on top of the tank if you need to, if that's the only place you can put it. As long as it's not smashing into corals and breaking them, it's okay. And that way you can kind of keep the tank cool if your room is too warm while you're doing whatever it is you're doing. Whether you're going to go out and buy a chiller all of a sudden, or you're going to install a window air conditioning unit for that room to kind of cool that one room down to keep the aquarium from getting too warm. You know, there's different options, but ice is a great way to bring tank temperature down in an emergency, and it's not cheap. I mean, when I do it for my tank, when there's a thing, and 2 years in a row I had a problem. 1 year, the house was too hot because the AC broke, and it took them a while to get the part. There was the other one where, you know, the storm hit, and it knocked out power to my house for 24 hours, and the generator was running, but the house was 88 degrees. And each time I buy ice, I buy about $80 worth of ice, and I put that in there. But if I have to spend $80 once a year on ice, so be it. I mean, it's not the end of the world. It is a solution to a problem in a temporary crisis. So that's it for the temperature. I talked about everything on my list, it looks like. I just want to finally say that warmer tanks are rarely ideal, so I would recommend that you keep it a little bit cooler, possibly. So give it some thought, see what you think. But if your tank's doing perfectly, don't change it because I said so. All right, let's take a look at all the comments because I've ignored them while I was staying eye contact with the camera. And let's see, what do we got here? How about this guy right here? We'll stick this on here for now. Let me adjust that camera slightly. I like it better when you don't see the blue screen just sitting there. Stop moving. Okay. Elmer's here from Holland. Wow. What time is it there? And Ziggy made it here too. Says he hasn't been able to catch a live in a while. Enzo asked me a long time ago, more than an hour ago, what's your favorite fish? I always say the mandarin. The blue mandarin is just a beautiful animal. It's just graceful. It's slow moving. It's methodical in its hunting. It's just a beautiful fish. I really like it. Reef Keeper says, I've been reefing for 33 years and I'm still learning something new every day. You're never an expert in my opinion. There are people out there that do believe they're experts and they're not in the hobby 33 years. I tend to feel like I do have expertise in many areas, but I still am learning too, and I'm very aware of that. The best part is I don't have this horrible ego that causes chaos with people around me. You know, I understand I could be right about something, but I could be wrong. And I always try to keep an open mind and try to see what the information is being given to me to decide if it's right for me or not. But ultimately, I do have to decide what I'm going to do with my aquarium. Let's see. Corey says, even when we're not newbies, we are. Let's see. Tom says, what's the best way to learn? Really, the best way is reading books. I know that sounds super old school, and I realize you could probably download stuff to a Kindle these days. But holding a book in your hand and having some quiet time to just absorb information is the best thing you can do. And, I was reading some of the older coral magazines because I was doing some research on something, and I pulled it out. And I love that what I'm getting given to me in every article that's been vetted and deeply delved into and editorialized completely to make sure that it comes across with the right information so that it makes sense, so that my brain can comprehend it. The information is just timeless. And people that subscribe to Coral Magazine also, you're getting a magazine in the mail, but you have access to the digital edition that goes back about 9 years. I think you can go all the way back to like 2015, 2014, somewhere in there, and you can look at all these previous issues. And you could say, hey, I saw, you could do a search. I'm looking for something about the mandarin fish. And you search the digital edition. It'll show you all the articles that talked about the mandarin. And you can go find that one story that pops out in your mind and say, all right. And you can learn a lot about what that expert wrote on that one specific topic and just really flesh out your knowledge and help you get a better, bigger picture of what you're thinking about incorporating into your reef tank. Spider says, you are no longer newbie in marine when you can mix seawater properly. Let's see. And then he said, I have two, I think he says marine tanks. One is a species only tank with the orange saddleback that he's had for 7 years. That's awesome. Crazy for seahorses. That's such a good point. When you get bored, try breeding marine animals. We can't breed enough. That is true. That is the one thing, that's one of the things I've never done. I've never tried to raise any type of marine fish. I just have never been so inclined. I keep thinking I should try clownfish because I think it's one of the easiest ones to do. And I've just never done it. I have to grow rotifers. I have to grow phytoplankton. I got to maintain this little tank. I have to do all this stuff. And I've never done it. I keep saying, one day I'm going to try it, but I haven't done it. Crazy for Seahorses said, I got a wet-dry trickle filter for my marine tank, but I'm an Austrian. Yeah, see, that's why. It's only in Austria that this happens. And then the question was asked, how is the tank handling more nutrients? Well, by me dumping in more nori, you would say, oh, that's dangerous. But my phosphates are only at 50, so it's okay. And I'll put in some phosphate RX and bring it down a little bit. But I'd rather have a fat fish than low phosphate in my tank. I'm looking for another thing here. Zach says, thank you for all you do. We need the anemone tank build. I love watching your old videos. Thank you. And that is definitely coming. So I'm leaving town this week. Remember, I mentioned I was hoping to maybe work on the anemone cube before my birthday. But my birthday's coming up next week. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on my trip, see my parents, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to be working on Coral Magazine. And when I wrap up Coral Magazine, which is basically mid-February, I'm going to tackle that tank because I will have a break from Coral. Coral is about to become a lot of my day. Once we start going to layout, a lot happens, and I have to be on top of it day after day after day. And then the final week before print, it's Coral week. It's like rush week. It's the worst. And I am doing everything I can, making all the wheels spin to make sure that we have a successful launch. In other words, that it goes to the printer without incident. And then I get this break. And I finished all my projects on the house that I was working on, so now I can work on the tank and get that project done, which is in my house. Oh, it's going to be so great. But yeah, I'm basically going to commit to working on it at that point when Coral goes to print. which is mid-February. So if you are subscribing now, you will get the next issue that goes to print. If you wait too long, we will go to print and you're like, I didn't get a copy. It's like, yeah, you waited too long. So now is the time. These weeks right now, this week, next week, the next week after that, early February, get yourself the subscription to Coral Magazine. And that way you'll get the next issue we're working on, which looks like this one. This is the one we're working on right now. And it's all about softies. So I hope you guys will subscribe. It's a great magazine. I can't emphasize that enough. Speed Demon says, thermometers are usually pretty precise, however, they're not very accurate. Finding a thermometer that's accurate to plus or 1 degree is surprisingly difficult. More than likely, everyone's tank varies a lot. Well, so are you talking about the accuracy of the temperature probe like that the Apex uses or the Hydros uses to measure the water? Or are you talking about where it sits on the gauge? Because if you're, let's say you had one of those glass ones. I love the glass thermometers. They're like $4 or $5 at the fish store. They just sit in the tank and float at the surface, and they tell you the temperature of the tank. Now, the little card in there, or the little, the part with the red stuff that measures mercury. Oh, what the hell's in there? That thing goes up and down. If those shift, it can change, and you could get an inaccurate number. But it would be inaccurate always. It would always be wrong. So no matter what, you're still going to be within a certain range of your temperature all the time. And I answered that already. Spock is doing much better. Thank you for asking. I appreciate that. CJK. Taylor said, what type of generator do you have? I'd like to think that if you run a controller, you'd want one of those fancy inverter-style generators. Okay, great question. So I have a 3-fuel generator that I bought from Costco a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, 2021. It's coming up on 3 years. And it can run on natural gas, propane gas, or gasoline. I only run on gasoline. I've never tried propane. I really should try it once just to see what it's like, because I can just grab one of those bottles like you use for the barbecue grill and hook it up and just kind of get the experience. It'd be smart to at least have that as an option and have practiced one time with it. But I don't have the type that's automatic. It's something you pull out of the cabinet and you put it outside and you run the cord to it. I did a video about my generator. It's on this channel. I probably uploaded it about 8 or 9 months ago. So be sure to watch that because I show exactly how everything connects. It's a really good generator. I'm very happy with it. On last week or 2 weeks ago, I think it was last week, I did some updates on my generator because I tested it and it was leaking fuel and it wasn't staying on. I was like, oh no. I ended up buying a new carburetor for it because it was $30 delivered to my door. I was like, that's a lot easier than me dissecting this thing. And I put it all together and my generator is working perfectly again. And I'm happy about that. But you mentioned an inverter style generator. And I know that Terrence from, who was with Neptune Systems for so long, he kept pushing everyone needs to get an inverter generator. And inverter generators cost more than gasoline generators. They are a cleaner type of energy, which is supposed to be better for your power bricks, that run your pumps and your lights. That being said, I've been running gasoline generators anytime I needed power over the last 20 years. And all the things I had to plug in, plugged into that generator, through a massive cord. Like right now, I have a giant cord that goes from the generator that plugs into the 50 amp outlet on the side of the generator. And that leads to a switch box that leads to my sub panel that has 6 circuits. And I'm basically providing 50 amps to the entire fish room. Every outlet in the room is now getting power off a generator instead of from the city. And if and whatever is plugged in doesn't have to be, I don't have to move plugs. I literally just take this giant cord, uncoil it, and plug it in the generator, flip the big switcher box thing over, and everything's running off of that. And then when the power comes back on, my ceiling fan starts turning or the lights on in the bathroom or the kitchen, then I'll wait about 30 minutes to an hour to make sure they mean it because I have trust issues. And if the power stays on and the ceiling fan keeps spinning, I'm like, all right, fine. And I flip the big switch box thing again, and then I go kill the generator outside because now I'm on city power again. And that's how I've been doing it. And I haven't lost anything. When I haven't. I'm going to say I did lose one thing, but that was when my old generator exploded. It went bang, bang, and everything surged, and then everyone went dark, and that generator died. Okay, it was that, and yeah, I took out an EB8. It just cooked it. But I have not had problems with electronics being ruined by the generator, so I have not felt the urge or the need to buy an inverter generator, nor to tell people to buy that kind. I think any kind of generator is better than none. And a lot of people are buying power walls and battery systems, and they're swearing by them, and it's great. I mean, anything that gives you more power during an outage is better than having zero. And I'm very saddened when I see people put posts online saying, hey, my power's out, it's been out for a couple hours, I don't know when it's going to return, what should I do now? It's like, oh, why are you asking it now? That's the worst time. You should have prepared for this. Jay says 3 Inkbirds on 3 different tanks, 5 years or 5+ years with no issues. Saved me multiple times. I'm glad to hear that. That's great. Reef Keeper said that he's had the same experience, and he's using the Inkbird with his Hydros and has 2 fail-safes. Let's see. UV Reef Bulbs, that's a nice name, says, thanks for the advice on using Phosphate RX. What a simple, perfect remedy and so safe to use. I totally agree. Mina says, what about using AI like Google or ChatGPT to learn as a beginner? Would that be advisable? Okay, so here's the problem. ChatGPT is going to look at everything on the planet and coalesce that into an answer for you. And I've looked up multiple things in that software specifically to see what kind of answers I get. And while it does provide some guidance, it also oftentimes mentions that it's not guaranteed. Matter of fact, it usually has a caveat near the end, like, and all the things I just recommended, you should also consider that this may not be completely up to date. And it's like, So I do think that more people will be turned into AI for stuff, but the question I'm going to ask, where is AI getting the information from? Is it getting it from the books written by Ron Shemek, Scott Michael, Eric Borneman, Mike Paletta? Is it getting that knowledge and using it to help you with your answer to your question? Or is it gleaning it from the Facebook groups and the Twitter feeds? Is it getting it from the old threads on Reef Central, the build threads where people talked about their tank for 7 years in a row like I did? Or is it getting it, from the front page of websites promoting their protein skimmer? Is it using, where is its knowledge base that it's using to learn from? So will it be ideal? I don't know. It might be a case-by-case basis. It might be perfect to explain how does the cycle work, but it might not be great about answering your question for nitrate removal. I don't know. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I think a beginner would be best off just literally getting their hands on some books. And one book that everyone swore by back in the day was the one from Bob Fenner, The Conscientious Marine Aquarist. It's a thick book, very small print, lots of information. And then there is the Reef Aquarium, Volume 1, 2, and 3 by Sprung and Delbeck. Those 3 books, especially number 3, 3 is all about equipment. Those are excellent publications. There's books by Julian Sprung on algae, on invertebrates, on corals, specific topics, specific books that you could page through with pictures to really help you recognize things, so it's not just a body of text. Books. Still recommend them. I don't know what they use in schools these days. Do they use books? I don't know. I know that electronics are more and more popular in school. I just don't know if they actually use books. Aquatic Depot says, hello from Mexico City. Been in the hobby since 1989. Even longer than I have. And even as a business several years now, I'm still learning. Great channel. Keep up the good work, Mark. Oh, thank you. Thomas the Cat says, I've been thinking about upgrading my lights on my 75-gallon softies and 180 gallon SPS running Nick Crew on both. How to know best lighting for what tank and how many lights needed for each. It's really confusing. Normally, most lights cover a 2 foot by 2 foot footprint. So if you're trying to decide what will work on your 75 gallon, I would say 2 lights. And on your 180 gallon, I would say 3 lights because it's a 6 foot tank and the 75 is a 4 foot tank. So you got 2 lights here and 3 lights there. Now, which lights to use? If you're happy with Nick Crew, you could keep using it, maybe even increase the intensity of what you're running them at. Maybe you're running them at 70% and you might want to try running them at 85% and see if that makes up for whatever lacking you tend to sense is going on. Or you could, jump into a different type of light fixture entirely. I'm waiting for the new lights that Hydros is releasing. They're coming from Reef Bright, and I'm very excited to see them as reality. And I don't know what's the deal. Last I heard, they started putting them out there, but they're like 2 foot lights. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use that. That would actually work. A 4 foot tank, you need 2 of them, and boom, you're set up. And it talks to the Hydros, which is nice. A lot of people have been using Radions. I myself use the Sky. Sky is from Neptune Systems. I've been using them for several years. I'm very happy. They're not cheap by any means. They're basically $900 each. But, I'm going to run that same light for 5 years. My tank runs cooler because I'm using those lights, so I don't use as much electricity, and those lights use less electricity than my metal halides did. Lucifer has a question, y'all. I love that. Getting back in the hobby. I don't have a tank yet, and I've been hearing a lot about the necessity of having a quarantine tank. What type of upkeep does a quarantine tank require? Thank you for asking that question. It's a good one. Quarantine tanks are basically a body of water that have minimal filtration, and you're going to put whatever new thing you're getting, whether it's a fish or a coral, in there temporarily for observation and possibly for treatment. Normally, most people want to have a quarantine tank for fish, and then they have a quarantine tank for coral. And the reason they separate them is because the fish are going to use a certain type of medication that could pretty much wipe out what's going on in the coral tank. That's why we medicate them away from the reef tank. But in my case, I had a quarantine tank in the past. I put in a couple of sacrificial pieces of live rock in there that would live there for the rest of its natural life. And it was part of my filtration. And when I bought fish, I'd put them through safety stop, and then I'd put them in that tank to look at for a couple of weeks or so. But I didn't have much success with fish in quarantine. Unfortunately, I'd find them dead. I'm like, why? What? You're so close to moving to the main tank. And so I stopped doing that. And I've been just putting my fish through safety stop, which is a rapid medicated bath that takes 2 hours. And then they go into my reef tank. And that has been a much better success story for me. Corals, on the other hand, not nearly as finicky as fish. And when you buy corals, you can put them into a quarantine tank. You need light and flow and, of course, temperature control and top off and minimal feeding. And you can observe the coral. You can take it out. You can dip it. You could put in a medication in the tank that was made for corals. Like we use Interceptor to get rid of red bugs. So I'd put that right into the quarantine tank every single time I got a new coral to make sure I wasn't putting red bugs in my tank. If I had zoanthids that had zoanthid spiders, I could put zoanthids in there and leave them in there for 45 days or longer, looking for the spiders and plucking them out one by one until I could no longer find spiders. And once the system seems spider-free, then I could put the zoanthids in my tank and not worry about an infestation plaguing my system. But what does the quarantine tank need other than that? Occasionally a water change. And most people would drain the water out of the quarantine, throw it away, take water out of the reef and put it in the quarantine tank, put new water into the reef. So you see you're kind of recycling the water into the quarantine tank. But it doesn't need anything special. It's not anything crazy. It doesn't need a controller and all this stuff. But I would recommend some kind of an automated top-off because those are pretty cheap and they just keep the salinity the same number all the time, which is super convenient. And if you can just keep the quarantine tank just always running, then if you have an impulse buy, you drive by a fish store, you stop at a buddy's house, you come home with a new coral, you got somewhere to put it that night, even if you don't have time to dip. You can just say, okay, you go in here, I'll see you in the morning. I'll deal with you tomorrow. And you can just move on with your life. So that. But it shouldn't be difficult. But the reason I left the rock in there is because if there is anything evil in there or some kind of infestation gets into the rock, that rock stays there. It's not going to ever touch my reef, and so I don't have to worry about it spreading like some kind of a predatory worm or snail or flatworms or something like that. Diaz says, I went to a coral show and got some new corals, guys. A jawbreaker, utter chaozoas, the jack-o'-lantern lepto, pink montipora, and some weird rainbow chalice that encrusts. That's awesome. Congratulations on a bunch of pretty things. Okay. I see what you're saying, Speed Demon. So he's saying, yeah, you could have a probe that's inaccurate. And yeah, it's possible. And, you could run 2 probes side by side and then choose which one to believe and remove the other one from the equation. Or you can just kind of go with, it is what it is. It's sort of like the thermostat in your house. We don't know if it's even deadly accurate. Is it scientifically accurate, or is it just, close enough? And if you're cold, you bump it up a degree. And if you're hot, you lower it, whatever. You just make a slight adjustment. It doesn't really matter what the number is on the display for your thermostat. You just want to be comfortable. And you're comfortable if you just nudge it down slightly. But avoiding big swings is important when it comes to temperature. And having some kind of thermometer is important, so at least you know what range you're floating around at. Oh, that's neat. Taylor says, during a hurricane is the best time to get a generator. FEMA dedicates funds to refund them, window units as well. They gave us almost $1,100 from the last ones that came through Houston. Wow. Well, you see, I don't return them. I get a tool, I use it, and I keep it for next time. Let's see, how we doing? We're coming up in 2 hours. Let's see what's left. Huang says, I just went to my LFS, Big Al's, that's up in Canada, and got a mini red war scully for 60 Canadian. What is that, like $7? What a deal. I haven't bought corals for over 6 months. That's awesome. I'm happy for you. Alex says, how long do LEDs lights last? Should they be replaced every certain amount of years, even if they're still working? Yes! And I've talked about that not too long ago. So basically, LED lights, generally speaking, we like to think they last 5 years. And that may not be your situation. You might find that you have to replace it sooner. Okay, it all comes down to how you use them. But generally speaking, if you're buying a fixture, it should be a 5-year fixture. And if it's still working after 5 years, yes, you're having some light go in the tank, but it's not it's definitely not providing the same spectrum it was providing when you first bought it. Things wear out over time, spectrums do shift, LED diodes fail, things overheat. There's a lot of different reasons. And so unless you're going to basically desolder and replace parts on this light fixture to make it fresh, like Dwayne was doing, he bought the cheapest lights he could get from China. He had these black boxes, and every single year he would take one down at a time, and he must have had, I don't know, 6 or 8 of them over his tank. And every year he took one down, opened it up, removed every one of the LEDs, soldered all new ones in, put it up, took the next one down, did that. Every year he replaced all the LEDs, and I think he ran all the lights at 100% every single day. And his reef was gorgeous. It was amazing. But after all those years of doing that, he says, I am sick of doing this. I don't want to keep replacing LEDs. So he got himself the Skies, and he put them over his tank, and he loves not soldering his lights. And I could see that. My friend Jerry had lights over his 150-gallon aquarium. They were Radions they had for 5, 6, 7 years. And he's like, my reef won't grow. It's just sitting there stagnant. Nothing's happening. And he's like, I know it's not the lights. I'm like, it absolutely is the lights. And he's like, no, they're fine. They're still working. I'm like, those lights are done. They're toast. They're finished. And he said, no, Mark. I was like, when did you buy them? And he did the math and goes, I think it was 2013. And I'm just like, oh my God, they're done. I mean, I was even looking up when did that generation of Radeon come out, on Google. And so then we realized they were like 6 or 7 years old. And he said, but they're so expensive. I'm like, I know, but you got your money's worth. You got the 5 years out of them. It's just think about it this way. You weren't buying metal halides every 12 months. You weren't buying T5s every 9 months. You weren't buying VHOs every 10 to 11 months throughout those 5 years. You bought all the lights up front and you didn't pay for them again for 5 years other than electricity. And even that, the electricity was less than what you used if you used metal halides, T5s, VHOs. So yes, you got your money's worth. They're done. You need new lights. And I shipped him 3 new lights for his tank. He put them over the tank. He goes, wow, my tank looks so much better. And I was like, well, I'm not surprised, but they're brand new, of course. And then it was like a month or 2 later, he goes, you wouldn't believe how fast things are growing. I was like, yes, I do believe why things are growing, because you now have good lights over the tank again. So they do have a shelf life. They're not forever. And even though they turn on, they're not necessarily going to be good for you. Now, are they good for anything else? I don't know. Could you throw them over some house plants and make them grow? Maybe. I don't know. But you just plan on looking for new lights every so often. But, like the skies that I have over my tank, I don't know when I installed them. I think I'm coming up on maybe 4 years now. And last summer, I bought 3 more as backups because they're no longer being sold. And so now I should have, no matter how long those last, or if they prematurely fail, I got 3 more I can throw in the tank and hopefully rebuild. Like ship them to Dwayne and said, go solder these. Fix my lights for me, because I don't know how they're going to be repaired. But yeah, that's the answer to that. They are not until they turn off. And then Thomas asked, what's a good light for my tank? We've talked about it. The Radeon would be a good one for you. If I can ever get a firm to work for you, you could buy it. Lucifer says, so I can rely on live rock and water changes for a quarantine tank for filtration. Yeah. If you want to hang a protein skimmer on the back, you could. But if you just want to do water changes and keep it super simple, you totally can do that too. Larry says, what uses magnesium in our systems and how important of an element is it? It's very important. The magnesium level in a tank should be 3 times the calcium level. And in the ocean, it's like 1280 ppm. Most of us like to keep it around 1300, 1350. I personally like to keep it at 1400. Anything above that is overkill. It's just absolutely, it's not going to make anything magical happen. I know some people like to push the envelope and go even higher, 1500, 1600. The higher magnesium level, when you hit 1600 and above, will cause your snails to stop moving because their foot that they travel on will atrophy and they're just frozen in place until the magnesium level comes down again. So 1400 is my number. I like that number because specifically Montiporous species use it for coloration. Your coralline algae benefits from magnesium as well. So those are my 2 reasons for magnesium. And it is very important. It's a major element. It's not a minor or trace element. It's a big element. You got your calcium at 400. You got your magnesium at 1300. You got your potassium at 400. I mean, these are big numbers. Then you got like strontium at 8 ppm. You've got iodine at like 1.6 ppm. It's like nothing compared to 1300 magnesium. So it's an important one. Diaz says, I bought my lights used. Now you have me worried. You don't have to be worried. How used are they? Are they 7 years used? Are they 1 year used? Some people are in and out of the hobby quickly. It would be nice to know how long they've been running. But you should get several years out of them. That tank behind me came with that AI Prime. And, the tank was about a year old when I got it. And I've had it for another year. So it's 2 years old. It's got a couple more years left in it. And my Caitlin's Reef, I bought a brand new light for that tank. It's been running 2 years. And for some reason, that light keeps turning off in the middle of the day. And I'm like, what is going on? And it's not a cleaning thing. You open up the app and it says 1969 in it. And I say, set current time and date. And it just updates to 2025 and the light turns on instantly. And then a couple hours later, I look at it and it says 1970. I'm like, what is happening? Now that is a bug in some software that irritates me. But regardless, even if it is 1970 in the app and I'm traveling, the light will come on sometime. It'll just be different than the time I need it to be on. It'll be the middle of the night or something. But if I'm out of town, it doesn't matter. But I'd rather it just be correct all the time. And I'm annoyed that that keeps happening. And it did it in this tank last year. There was like 3 or 4 days in a row where the date just kept changing. Like, what is happening? I feel like someone at AI is doing something. But because I have 2 AI primes using the same app, and this light was off, but the living room one was on, I don't understand it. And when you looked at the timestamp for this tank, it said 1969. And you look at the Caitlin's Reef, and it said 2024. I was like, how does that work? And now I'm having the exact same thing happen, but it's reverse. Now this tank is lit properly like it should be, but Caitlin's Reef, 1969, 1970. I'm like, oh. But hopefully it'll just kind of, the gremlins will go away and it'll go back to its normal routine again. Speed Demon says, what do you do for nutrients in a coral quarantine? Mine constantly bottom out. I dose frozen food juice and some ammonia to keep nutrients up. If you're using water out of your reef tank and putting it in the quarantine tank, you should have nutrients there. And if you don't do very many water changes, nutrients should, again, not be bottoming out because you're not putting new water in. If you have a fish in the quarantine tank swimming around and being fed, it's going to poop. That's going to add some nutrients. If you want to add some food to the tank, you can. I mean, actual food, frozen foods. You can use Benary food, but that doesn't do anything to nutrients. But nutrients, I mean, it's a quarantine tank. It's temporary. It's for a brief duration of weeks, possibly a month and a half, and then after that, the livestock moves into your tank anyway, so it shouldn't be a problem with nutrients. Yes, a Gen 6 could not be that old. That's true. So you're fine with that. Okay, someone else put something here. Larry did. It's Water Test Saturday. He's absolutely right. So I want to remind you guys, today, please do test your tank parameters and see what's going on with your reef. Make sure that everything's on track. And, if there's anything wrong, make the correction. But you wouldn't know it's wrong if you didn't do the testing. So please do test your water. It does save lives. It's very important. And I wish you guys the best. I will see you again next Saturday with a new topic, and I hope you have a great weekend. Bye, guys.